Welcome to our deep dive. Today we're looking at this interesting article that someone sent us. It's all about inclusion in education, and specifically how it relates to folks with intellectual disabilities. The author is Jaime Hoerricks, and the article is titled From Obsolete Trends to True Inclusion, Embracing Matristic Values in Education. Now, the title is a bit of a mouthful,
Is.
but it's actually a really engaging piece.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
It starts by looking at a study that used software called JClic to teach programming skills to adults with ID. You might think, oh, that sounds a little dry.
You would, but
But it really isn't at all.
it's actually fascinating.
Yeah, the author uses this study as a jumping off point to look at this broader pattern, where we see marginalized groups being trained for jobs that are, well, basically about to become obsolete.
Yeah, it's like we're always one step behind.
Exactly. It's like we're constantly playing catch up. The article gives this example of how people with disabilities were encouraged to learn assembly line skills, just as those jobs were disappearing overseas. Then the same thing happened again with clerical work and the rise of computers. So now we're seeing this push towards coding and tech skills. But the author is asking, are we making the same mistake again? Especially with AI becoming so sophisticated.
It's a really important question, and to understand where the author is coming from, we need to look at what they call patriarchal capitalistic values.
Okay, so what does that mean exactly?
Well, it's this system that prioritizes economic productivity above all else.
Yeah.
And it tends to view people through a very limited lens, like what's their potential for the job market?
So instead of asking, what can this person contribute to society, we're asking, what task can we train them to do?
Yeah.
And the problem is those tasks are constantly changing. Sometimes they just vanish completely.
Exactly, and that's where the idea of matristic values comes in.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this.
It's this idea that we need to fundamentally shift how we view inclusion in education. Instead of focusing so much on those very specific task-oriented skills, the author is saying we need to embrace values like nurturing collaboration and community well-being.
So it's less about training for a specific job and more about fostering the whole person and their ability to thrive within a community.
Exactly.
I like that I'm getting like a teach a person to fish kind of vibe here. But before we get too deep into those solutions, I want to unpack this critique of the JClick study a bit more. On the surface, teaching coding seems like it could open up a lot of opportunities, but the author is pretty skeptical.
Yeah, they point out that the study focuses more on the technology itself, like how effective and adaptable the software is,
Huh.
rather than focusing on the empowerment of the learners.
So it's like saying, look how cool this software is. It can teach anyone to code. But is that really what matters most? Are those individuals actually gaining skills that will make their lives better? Will it help them live more fulfilling lives?
Right? And are they gaining autonomy? Are they learning how to advocate for themselves? Are they developing a sense of purpose within their community? Those are the questions the study doesn't address.
And that seems to be the heart of the author's critique. True inclusion isn't just about checking boxes or teaching specific skills. It's about recognizing that every person has inherent worth and empowering them to shape their own lives and to contribute to their communities in ways that are meaningful to them.
It is, and this brings us to a really interesting point. The author argues that in today's world, we might actually be steering people towards skills that are already on the verge of obsolescence.
Wait, you're saying even coding, which is like the skill of the future, right? You're saying even that might not be the golden ticket we all thought it was.
Well, think about it. What skills were considered absolutely essential in your field 5 years ago, 10 years
Yeah.
ago?
Yeah, I can see how things have shifted even in that short amount of time.
Exactly. This article is challenging us to prepare people for that constant change.
So if we can't rely on these hyper-specific, task-oriented skills, what are the alternatives? What should we be focusing on instead? I'm dying to know where the author takes this.
Well, the author suggests that we need to shift our focus to skills that are more resistant to automation, things that require uniquely human qualities, things like creativity, critical thinking, empathy, and complex communication.
Okay, so instead of churning out code monkeys, we should be nurturing creative thinkers and collaborators who can adapt to whatever challenges come their way. But what does that actually look like in practice? How do we teach these more nuanced, human-centered skills?
The author advocates for a more holistic and individualized approach to education, one that's deeply rooted in community and real-world experiences. So instead of treating learners as empty vessels just waiting to be filled with predetermined knowledge, we need to empower them to co-create their own learning journeys.
So it's more like a mentorship model, where learners are actively involved in shaping their educational paths, rather than passively absorbing information. That's interesting.
Exactly. It's about recognizing the many ways that people can contribute to society and creating opportunities for them to explore those possibilities. The author gives some really great examples, like partnering with community organizations to create real-world projects, or fostering intergenerational mentorship programs, where learners can share skills and knowledge with people from different age groups.
Those are fantastic examples. I can really see how that kind of hands-on collaborative learning would not only build those practical skills, but also foster a sense of belonging and purpose. It takes education beyond the classroom walls and makes it relevant to people's everyday lives.
Precisely, and it helps break down those artificial barriers
Hmm.
between work and life, the ones that the patriarchal capitalistic model often reinforces.
Right.
Instead of viewing education solely as preparation for a specific job, it becomes a lifelong process of growth, connection, and contribution.
This is really painting a picture of a very different kind of future, one where education isn't just about churning out workers, but about cultivating well-rounded individuals who can adapt, collaborate, and create value in all sorts of ways. I have to push back a little bit, though. This all sounds amazing in theory, but how do we make sure people are equipped to navigate the job market? Don't they still need some level of technical skills to succeed?
You're absolutely right, and the author acknowledges that. They say technical skills are still important, but we need to view those skills within a broader context instead of hyper-specializing in one narrow area. That might become obsolete tomorrow. We should be focusing on developing a foundation of adaptable skills, skills that can be applied in a variety of contexts.
So it's about teaching people how to learn how to solve problems, how to communicate effectively, and how to collaborate. Those are skills that are valuable no matter what field you're in.
Exactly. Think about it. Someone who's really good at communication, problem solving, and critical thinking, they're going to be able to learn a new software program or adapt to a changing work environment much more easily than someone who's only been trained in one very specific task.
That makes me think of that old saying, it's not what you know, it's who you know. But maybe in the future, it'll be more like, it's not what you know, it's how well you can learn.
Uh-huh. I like that. And the matristic framework really supports that idea. It's about fostering those qualities of curiosity, adaptability, and resilience that will allow people to thrive in a world where change is constant.
It's like we're moving away from a model of training the tool to a model of empowering the learner. Instead of just teaching someone how to use a specific program, we're equipping them with the mental tools and the social skills to navigate a complex and ever-evolving world.
You said it perfectly, and that shift in perspective, it's relevant for all of us, not just for people with intellectual disabilities.
Okay, this isn't just about one specific population.
No, it's about all of us. We all need to be thinking about how we can cultivate those essential human qualities in ourselves and in the people around us.
I love how this conversation started with a specific critique of one study, and now it's broadened into this discussion about the very purpose of education and what kind of future we're building.
It's about redefining what it means to be successful in life, isn't it? Moving away from that narrow focus on economic productivity and embracing a more holistic view of human potential.
Absolutely, and that brings us back to this idea of matristic values. We've talked about nurturing collaboration and community well-being, but what are some of the other core principles of this framework, and how can we really apply them to create a more inclusive and empowering educational system?
Well, the author really emphasizes the importance of recognizing and valuing diverse ways of knowing and being. It's about moving away from a one-size-fits-all approach to education and creating spaces where everyone can learn and contribute in ways that are meaningful to them.
So celebrating those individual strengths and talents, recognizing different learning styles, and creating opportunities for people to express themselves in unique ways. It sounds like we're talking about a fundamental shift in the culture of education.
We are, and that shift requires us to examine our own biases, our own assumptions about what counts as valuable knowledge or successful learning. The matristic framework challenges us to think bigger and to recognize the inherent worth of every individual, regardless of their abilities or disabilities.
This is powerful stuff. It's about creating a world where everyone feels seen, valued, and empowered to contribute. But how do we move from these lofty ideals to concrete action? What are some tangible steps we can take to embody these matristic values in our own lives and communities?
One of the key principles of the matristic framework is reciprocity, the idea of mutual giving and receiving.
Okay, so it's not just about providing support or opportunities for others, but also being open to receiving their gifts and contributions in return.
It's exactly. It's about recognizing that everyone has something valuable to offer and that we all benefit from sharing our knowledge, our skills, and our experiences. In a matristic society, learning is a two-way street, a constant exchange of ideas and perspectives.
I see how that principle of reciprocity could be really transformative in education. Instead of viewing teachers as the sole holders of knowledge, we create a more collaborative learning environment where students are encouraged to share their own insights and experiences, and where everyone is constantly learning from each other.
Exactly, and this can go beyond the classroom, too. Imagine communities where intergenerational mentorship is the norm. People of all ages and abilities sharing their skills and knowledge, and everyone feeling valued for their unique contributions.
This is making me rethink the whole idea of community. It's not just about living in the same place, it's about creating this web of interconnectedness and mutual support, where everyone has a role to play.
That's a beautiful way to put it, and that sense of belonging and purpose. That's something that's often missing in our current society. With all the individualism and competition, the matristic framework offers a real alternative, a vision of a world where we're all in this together, supporting each other's growth and celebrating our collective achievements.
I love that vision. It's so hopeful and inspiring. But I also know that changing deeply ingrained societal values, it's a long and challenging process. So where do we even begin? Where do we even start to shift our culture towards this more collaborative and nurturing way of being?
The author suggests that we can start by being more mindful of the language we use and the stories we tell.
So paying attention to how we talk about success, value, and contribution, challenging those narratives that equate worth with economic productivity, and that view people through this very narrow lens.
Exactly. It's about shifting our focus from individual achievement to collective well-being, from competition to collaboration, and from material gain to the richness of human connection.
You know, this reminds me of something you said earlier about breaking down those barriers between work and life. It seems like the matristic framework is all about blurring those lines and recognizing that our lives are this tapestry of interconnected experiences.
It is, and it's about recognizing that true fulfillment doesn't come from what we acquire or achieve, but from the quality of our relationships and the contributions we make to something larger than ourselves.
This conversation has given me so much to think about. It's challenging me to examine my own values and assumptions, and to really imagine a future where education is a force for positive change, both for individuals and for society as a whole.
That's fantastic to hear, and I think that's the power of this article. It sparks these deeper conversations about what matters most and how we can create a world that reflects those values.
I couldn't agree more. And I'm really curious to hear from you listening. How are you responding to these ideas? What resonates with you? What challenges your assumptions? What gives you hope? Wow, this deep dive has really made me think differently about inclusion, and what it really means to prepare people for the future. It's easy to get caught up in those trends, the latest tech skills and all that. But this article reminds us that those things can change so quickly.
It's true, if we focus only on those trendy skills, we might miss those timeless human qualities, the things that help people thrive in any environment.
I think a lot of people listening might feel a little overwhelmed. I know I do. This idea of shifting societal values away from that individualistic model, that's a huge undertaking.
It is, but the author reminds us that we're not starting from scratch. Matristic values are already present in many cultures and communities.
Oh, that's a good point.
It's about recognizing and amplifying those systems of care and collaboration, and integrating them more intentionally into our educational approaches.
So instead of a complete overhaul, it's more about rediscovering and revaluing what's already there. Those human-centered practices that foster connection, empathy, a sense of shared purpose.
Exactly.
You mentioned indigenous communities earlier.
I did.
They've been emphasizing these ideas for a long time, right?
For centuries, they've emphasized the interconnectedness of all things.
Yeah.
And the importance of passing down knowledge through storytelling and mentorship.
Those are definitely practices we can learn from.
Absolutely, we can adapt them to our own context.
And you talked about intergenerational mentorship, too. I love that idea.
Me too.
Pairing younger learners with older adults. I think that could be so enriching for everyone involved.
Imagine the younger generation gaining wisdom and perspective.
Yeah.
And the older generation feeling valued and connected. It's a beautiful cycle.
It really is. And it also challenges those ageist attitudes we see so often. Instead of segregating people by age, we create these opportunities for meaningful interaction across generations.
And even technology can play a role here.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, even though it's often seen as a barrier to connection. Technology can help facilitate those intergenerational exchanges.
I see what you mean.
Think about video calls, connecting classrooms with senior centers, or online platforms where people can share skills and stories across distances.
That's amazing. It really shows how technology can be a powerful tool for building bridges.
It is if we use it intentionally and thoughtfully.
So we've gone from a critique of a software program to envisioning this future where education is deeply rooted in community, collaboration, and the celebration of human diversity. What are some of the key takeaways you hope our listeners will walk away with?
The most important takeaway is that we all have a role to play in creating a more inclusive and equitable world. Whether we're educators, parents, community leaders, or just concerned citizens, we can start by examining our own biases and assumptions and looking for opportunities to build bridges and foster connections.
It all starts with that personal reflection, doesn't it? Asking ourselves, what values am I embodying? How am I contributing to a more just and compassionate world?
Sure.
What small steps can I take to make a difference?
Exactly. And remember, change doesn't happen overnight. It's a process.
Yeah.
It takes patience, persistence, and a willingness to challenge the status quo. But those small acts of kindness and connection, they can create ripples. And those ripples can lead to a more positive and hopeful future.
I love that it reminds us that we all have the power to make a difference. And sometimes those small acts of courage and compassion, they're the seeds that spark a larger movement for change.
They are.
Well, this has been an incredible conversation. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's given you some food for thought and inspired you to keep exploring these ideas. Remember, the future is not something that just happens to us. It's something we create together.